that way.
That's all right. Yeah, so how long did it take?
Yeah, about a month.
I mean, we purchased like a very, very simple setup from like eBay.
$100. The whole thing was $100.
And then we're like, hang on, there's more to this. So we found this setup, and we either do it at our own place or we carry around. So we move around a lot. So last week we had an entertainment company called the A-Team, which is a drumming company. So the first one, the boss came over and we just did it in our own studio.
Yep.
And the next one was like, dude, I've got a nice setup at home. Bring everything over and come. And we had like 9 boys on at the same time.
Wow.
So that was pretty.
And so you filmed them like practicing and doing all of that stuff?
So we filmed like a good conversation, and we filmed them playing as well. So it was really good. It was good. It was good content, to be honest. But yeah,
that was fantastic. Well, as a follow up, you guys should come and do a recording in Parliament.
To be honest, I'll be very keen on that. This is our next step. The step up is to like slowly go up and like meet different people. So
well, you guys should again see how you go in terms of like school and stuff like that, because generally parliamentary sitting days are during the term. They deliberately don't sit during school holidays and stuff like that. But question time is usually it starts at 12 on Tuesday.
Okay.
So midday, and then on Wednesday and Thursday it starts at 11.
And it's like an hour, 2 hours sort of thing?
It's about an hour. And so if you wanted permission to record, we could, help you get that through the speaker. That's usually pretty fine. Because there's usually media and stuff. There's a media gallery.
Amazing. Yeah.
I mean, there you go. That's one way to do it, eh?
That's the next
to be honest, there's a lot you can get out of this. Like just the networking. We realize the networking part of it is amazing. Like we just started as just fun, and now like we're sitting here having these conversations, and like I've got a potential, fingers crossed, a neurosurgeon jumping on, which I worked with from Liverpool Hospital. Yeah. So we're mixing a lot of different people, from businesses to education to entertainment.
Yeah.
Gives a good variety of what this community is all about.
Absolutely. And you've hit the nail on the head, because it's partly about the people, but then it's also about the conversations that you have.
Exactly.
And so often, and I think it's so true at the moment, because there's obviously a lot of discussions happening around, particularly, we're on Gen Z now, aren't we? Gen Z, Gen Alpha.
Don't know. Gen Alpha.
Is it Gen Alpha? What the hell is Gen Alpha?
I don't even know.
It's the babies that are going to make you guys feel old, just the way that you guys make me feel old.
Oh, yeah. They all make me feel old now.
You're Gen Z. I think you guys are Gen Z.
No, I'm definitely a millennial.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
What year were you born?
87.
87. I'm 95. Millennials. I don't know, man. I don't know. I just feel old already. You know how you feel it when your back starts hurting in the morning?
This is true. Especially after you've like done some exercise the day before. You're like, I'm going to be so good. I'm going to exercise. And then the next morning you're like, why did I do that?
Why? And then you just start feeling your bones hurt, your muscles, and you're like, no, I'd rather just stay in bed.
Exactly. Well, so there's a lot of discussion at the moment about particularly younger generations who are very used to, texting, and they're used to screens and things like that. Yeah. They're really uncomfortable initiating conversations. Yeah. Like it's even phone conversations, like they feel really, really afraid of, what the other person might say and that sort of thing. So having these conversations and just reintroducing, I think, the value of conversations in people, I think that's so beautiful.
And the thing is about it is that it's all, the conversations that you're having with people aren't obviously they're not everyday people, but people end up relating to them more than they think they would.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think that's what's actually driving.
I think we've lost this human touch, and I see it so much in clinic. I've lost it. Like this new generation of children that are born are all just very, very mentally unstable. A lot of them. That's what I've noticed. No, I want to say the word unstable, but I say there's a lot of more autism, more ADHD sort of diagnosis being made these days than ever before.
Yeah.
Maybe because we're just paying more attention to it, but the constant scrolling. Constant texting, constant I'm in my room, I don't want to get out. It's putting a very huge toll on our system and our schools, because I see it. I see a lot. So you probably deal with it.
Yeah, first thing that popped to my head is like vaping. Like I feel like teenagers now just hop onto that like very quickly, like quicker than most adults. But yeah, I guess one bad habit leads to the other. So maybe scrolling on social media leads to you. I don't know, like
you pick up all the lazy habits.
Yeah, exactly, and then you kind of just become this thing that you don't want to become. And as a teenager, that's the worst thing. I mean,
you know that the reason why algorithms and social media platforms and things like that are structured the way that they are is because there's decades worth of research to show the impact that those sorts of things have on your brain and on how it is conducive to that doom scrolling, that death scrolling kind of behaviour. But just going back to something that you said in terms of increased diagnoses of ADHD and autism and things like that, I would actually really love to see or even have a greater discussion around how much of that is actually clinical issues, how much of that is actually diagnosis of these things being sort of a disorder versus changes in the way that people are socialized from birth, right? Because there's some really interesting research that came out over the last sort of 5 to 10 years around the impact of things like screens and phones on young babies' capacity to recognize emotion and capacity to mirror emotion, especially in their parents. And so, when you look at, say, one of the key features of a diagnosis of autism or ADHD is that sense of lack of emotional intelligence or lack of emotional recognition, right? So how much of what we're kind of seeing in terms of the behaviours and, the struggles that a lot of young people are having is because the way that they're being socialised, the way that they're being trained to recognise and grow into the little human beings that they are, has shifted in the last 10, 15, 20 years compared to the generations previously. So before rushing to a diagnosis of, this person has this clinical condition or this or that.
You got to look at the upbringing.
Yeah, you got to look at the bigger picture. How much of what's happening over here is actually impacting a broader number of young people, and therefore it's it's actually a population-wide issue along this, specific area, rather than just rushing to kind of put someone in a box and
labeling them, because that's what people look for. I feel like I get a mixture of stuff. I get people coming in, the mothers are worried, and some of them the kids have been through a lot. For example, there's always one that just keeps striking my mind. She recently moved to the area, right? Yeah. Actually, before we do all this, we actually did not have a proper introduction.
I realise that now. She's 7 minutes
just right into it. Throw it in, man. Throw it in.
Kick it off. All right, so welcome to Principology. And this guest, if you don't recognise her already, I'll let you introduce yourself. Obviously, the Liverpool MP, but introduce yourself. How would you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am. So I'm Charisma. As you've already introduced me, I'm the member for Liverpool and have been for about the last 12 months or so. But actually, even well before that, I am an occupational therapist.
Yeah, we'll get into that. We'll get into
your background.
There's a lot. Yeah, so what was I saying? There was one came in. She recently moved to the area. So when she came to me, the mother was so distressed. There was a lot going on in her life. She broke up with her partner. She's got a new partner. She moved to the area. She's a very busy lady. She's got an NDIS business running around. Once she just gave me she just passed on like a quick tell you. I was like, hey, my son is struggling. He can't go to school. He's got all these suicidal ideations and self-harm. I'm like, how old? 9.
Yeah, wow.
I'm like, what has happened? I'm like, you know what? Let's bring him in. I want to see what's going on. She's like, he's got a psychologist, he's got a psychiatrist, he's got everyone on board. Yeah. I'm like, cool, but still, I want to build a rapport with this child because I feel like I'm going to be in the community for a while. I need to know what's going on. So she brings him in, and guess what? Her ex-husband or ex-partner dropped the kid around 7 months ago in front of the mother's house, and he was like, I don't want to ever see you again. He just drove out of his house.
Whoa.
That was as heartbreaking as it ever can be for me personally, because we've never grown up in this, we never experienced it, right? So when you notice such emotional detachment, and you've focused on it previously, which was the fact that we just don't know what sort of home environments these people come from, especially our area. Very low socioeconomic. You've got a lot of immigrants coming through, refugees. They've been through trauma. They've been through so much. And unfortunately, this intergenerational trauma is just, I think it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore around it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, just going off of that as well, we know from the experience of successive waves of immigrants as well that there's also differences in the way that different generations experience migration, displacement, that lack of connection and all of those sorts of things. When my parents first moved to Australia back in the early 90s, were, very educated people. They saw, perhaps more opportunities for themselves and,
of course.
and for us children here. And so they made a conscious decision to obviously, relocate, to start from scratch in many respects, change profession. And so they regarded things like having to change their profession, having to, really start from bottom up, not having that family support, all of those things as part of a decision that they had made, right? But for myself and my brother, it wasn't necessarily a decision that we had made. However, we felt like we were straddling two very different worlds, which was, the mainstream world that our friends that we inhabited, that we saw on TV, all of these things that you're kind of pushed towards needing to fit into, right? Needing to fit into, not wanting, because when you're a kid,
you just want to fit in.
That's right. Whereas, your home sort of environment is very much almost preserved, and there's a lot of discussion and a little bit of research, but more from other countries now, around how often diaspora populations, because of that sense of familiarity and comfort and wanting to hold on to something that they're not necessarily able to see in the mainstream society around them, they hold on to what society looked like in their home countries at the time they left.
Yeah.
So what my parents think of as India is the India that they left in 1992.
Oh, there you go.
And so even when they go back now, it is a very different society, very different, standards and values and all of the things that they're not very familiar with, not very comfortable with. And I know, speaking to some of my, like family friends, my aunties and uncles, they actually get reverse culture shock. So they might go back to India and they're just like, oh my God, what is this? All of these people, we never would have acted like this when we were young, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it's
blah,
so different.
like
our parents are just heading back to Iraq in like a week and a half for the first time since we've left.
Yeah, wow.
We left back in 1999.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a bit of a shock for them.
I think it's going to be emotional for them, to be honest. Yeah. Because as you said, like it is, I don't know, it's interesting because it's been 20 years, like 20 something years.
Yeah.
30 something years. So I guess I don't know. I guess maybe they'll come back with a different idea of their lives back then, or how their lives.
I think they'll definitely appreciate what we have here, because I always say it in every single episode, and every person I come across, even in the clinic, we are by far the most privileged generation to live in this country. This is one of the most. This is as good as it can be for first world. Right, so don't ever forget the opportunities that this country brings. Absolutely. We have so many things you can do. I would never have thought about what I am, and you're heading into psychology next year as well. Like, it's a big step. First people to rock up to universities, to be educated, to have these opportunities. I think we forget about this, and we focus on all the negatives in this sort of country. And there's a lot, probably from your area of expertise. You come across a lot of different problems that I guess perhaps are just created by this. I guess almost as a generation of having everything to them, already has everything, yet they're wanting more and more and demand more out of this country, but they forget that you have to serve a specific sort of standard, and you have to pay back your time and dues in order for you to see that the fruits of your achievements, I guess. Yeah. And everything takes time, and I feel like we're becoming lazier as a population to a certain extent to understand what it feels like to put this hard yard in.
Absolutely. Yeah. The way I kind of really like to see it is there's being sort of ambitious or greedy for yourself, and then there's being ambitious or greedy for for those around you or for what could be. And I, right from as far as I can remember, have very firmly believed in the idea that I'm very grateful for the opportunities and the privileges that I've been the recipient of, and for me to pay back or to I guess pay that forward is incredibly important. So I really want to be those people who lifts basically stretches a hand to lift people up rather than pull the ladder up behind me. And I think there'd be a lot of people that sort of reflect on how it could be teacher, could be a neighbour, it could be a work colleague, or whoever it is has done something big or small. It doesn't
just
have,
recognising
it's not the size.
them.
That's right. It's not the size of the impact that they've had on you, but they've been the ones to kind of reach back and pull you forward, and whether it's providing mentorship or
Bring it forward. Yep.
So providing mentorship and opportunities, or even just giving you advice or whatever it might be, that will just really sort of change the way that you think about something, so that you can carry it forward and you can actually fulfill your potential. Because now there is this sort of real idea of, if we're constantly talking about what needs to be improved or whatever, and I'm sometimes guilty of this as well, where you kind of like, this is an issue, etc. But it is an issue if it stops people from fulfilling their potential.
Exactly.
And if it kind of keeps people, stuck, where you could actually just reach back and offer them a hand to pull them up.
Yeah.
I think it's I don't know, it's a very interesting topic, because there's a lot that could be taken out of this. One thing that I look at is, I think everyone has an opportunity in this country. This country offers a lot of chances to people, a lot of opportunities, right? Yeah. But it's the lack of awareness and education about them.
Yes.
That's a big factor. Yeah. And people aren't aware that, hey, I can do this, or I can do this, or there's 10 different, for example, pathways to university. There are 10 different pathways to getting a particular job. People aren't aware of these things, and you can't blame them. It's just the home environment usually that dictates what sort of upbringing, as you said previously. So yeah, I try to really push the patients always to giving them more educational templates rather than just a band-aid and medications. Be like, hey, off you go, because I know that's how they'll come back and trust me as a clinician. Yeah. And as you said, like, you're an occupational therapist by
training, by profession, all of that fun stuff.
How did you get into it?
Look, I actually started in psychology.
Oh, yeah.
So when I graduated school, I was a little bit unsure about what I wanted to do. And I'd always my mum had always said, look, we don't have a doctor in the family, and she was pushing me towards medicine. And if you know anyone from sort of like an Indian background, you know that
ethnics in general, to be honest,
pretty much, right? Like, the approved professions are doctor, lawyer, engineer, those three things or nothing, right? No. And so I kind of went, you know what, like, I'm attracted to health, so healthcare is obviously really important to me. But I wasn't sure if I was prepared to commit to the amount of time that you need to study and train and all of the rest of it for medicine. So I was kind of like, I'll see what other opportunities are there. And so psychology was really interesting to me, and I thought, I'll start the course, see how it goes. Funnily enough, when I was in school, I also loved sort of history and kind of, politics and all of that kind of stuff, but from a more world perspective, right? So I thought, maybe I'll I was thinking, maybe have a goal to be a diplomat. It seems so glamorous. You just get to like swan around the world learning languages, living in different countries.
From the outside, it looks pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, I know. From the inside, I'm pretty sure it looks pretty good as well. Yeah. I've met a couple of diplomats over the last few years.
They enjoy their life, eh?
Yeah, and they actually have like really fascinating things that they do. So who knows? Life is long.
You never know.
But yeah, so I thought, maybe I want to be a bit of a diplomat. So I took up a combined science and arts degree, and I had a major in psychology, and I thought I'd major in politics and international relations for my arts degree. I did one course.
And you're like, nah.
I hated it.
I'm out.
I absolutely hated it. Politics and international relations anyway. Yeah. And I thought it was because the way that issues were discussed, the way that it was presented, it was as if, this politics was almost like a cosplay game that was happening in another world to a different set of people, and it wasn't what I thought it was, which was the things that affect the daily lives of you and I, right? That, for me, politics is very local, very personal. It is the stuff that makes you care about things,
exactly.
Right? And so I really didn't relate to the way that it was taught and presented. So I kind of switched gears a little bit, paid a little bit more attention to the psychology. And then when I was in my second year, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I was about 19.
That's quite old. It's a bit of a late onset.
So it's kind of there's apparently a kind of two peak onsets of type 1 when you're looking at teenage onset. One peak is sort of early teenage, so around 12, 13, and another peak is late teenage onset, which is around 18, 19.
Yeah, I think it's called latent diabetes sort of onset. It's very weird because I've met a 50-year-old who was type 1 diabetic. So you're like, you don't fit technically into type 1. It's between type 1 and type 2 because type 1 is known to be very early onset, like childhood. Yep. So it's very interesting. Very interesting.
But they classed me as type 1 because it was autoimmune.
Okay,
so
fair enough. Yeah.
It was literally had a really bad case of the flu. And it was just onset, and it was very quick as well. So, but within 3 months, I went from sort of not showing any signs at all to really kind of being hit bad by symptoms. My really close family friend / aunt is a registered nurse, and we stayed over at their place one day, and she noticed that I was exhibiting symptoms, and she said, "Have you had a blood test recently?" And I said, "Oh, I had one maybe about 3 or 4 months ago." And she said, "I think you need to get another one." And that showed that my blood sugars were really high, so they did all this testing. And anyway, the reason why I mention that is because as a result of that experience, I had a really close interaction with multiple parts of the healthcare system. So everywhere from my GP through to specialists, through to the hospital system, and it really kind of ignited a passion for healthcare, but it also sort of made me think about the way that people engage with the healthcare system and the way that people engage with their own health. And so it made me think about whether or not the stuff that I was learning in the course of my psychology degree was actually aligned with my healthcare journey and those of the other people that I met along the way and that sort of thing. And something that I was really thinking about was the need for sort of holistic, looking at a holistic image of people's engagement with, their healthcare, even looking at it. So, diabetes is a very sort of physical illness in terms of how it's, how it comes about, how it manifests in people, the signs and symptoms and things like that. But there is a huge mental and psychological component to it, as there is with any
gets neglected a lot of the times.
Any chronic illness. It's hard because dealing with it's like, let me put it this way. Anyone who says that they just automatically go to the gym every day, or they automatically have this particular routine that's all set up, and there's no effort in maintaining and keeping to that routine, is lying to you. Because anything that requires routine, anything that requires consistency, it requires effort to do that. And the same deal with managing a chronic illness requires consistency, requires effort, and that takes a mental and psychological toll as well. And so I was really thinking about all of those different aspects of it. And I thought, you know what, I don't think I want to be a psychologist anymore, but I know I wanted to stay in health. And so the other thing, I was like, I've done, half my course already. There's no way that I'm going back and doing another undergraduate.
Yeah, no way.
So I was looking at what my options were.
Masters it is.
Yes, exactly. And so I was looking at my options, reading really into what pathways what I'd already done could lead me into, what allied health opportunities there were out there, or whether I should go down a medicine path or whatever it might be. And I just ended up, stumbling across occupational therapy. I'd never met one before, never knew what it was. And then I actually, ended up shadowing one for a little bit. And I was like, wow, all of the things that I've been thinking about through my healthcare journey, all of the
sort of aligned with that.
Really aligned with the philosophy and how it kind of came together. And one of the things that I loved about the way that we're trained as OTs is when you look at someone and, their goals and their roles and what they do with their life, you're looking at anything that can impact their goals, right? Everything from their financial context to their spiritual context to their social, cultural the environmental context. So, for OTs, environment, like where you live, how you live, who you live with, all of those sorts of things is a very big factor in how we work with people.
It's a very holistic approach, and I think as medical clinicians, we don't have the time to explore a lot of these things. It's very time constrained for us. I think having a good OT makes a huge difference for our job and our journey with the patient. Because when I was in the hospital, we'll just refer, right? And we'll just look at the reports and be like, "You guys do a lot of work, man. It's a lot of work."
The reports are huge.
And I was like, it's OT is a very big factor now because, for example, it plays a very major role in the new schemes like NDIS, etc. It's a huge scheme now, right? Like I get a lot of patients coming through. But for yourself, do you still practice in OT, or you've sort of pulled back from it for a while?
I've pulled back from it for a little while, in two respects. One, obviously, being sort of in my first couple of years of a very new role.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to give myself, maximum opportunity to get used to it. Give it the time and the effort and the energy that it really deserves and needs, which is important. But the second aspect is there's a lot of restrictions on MPs in terms of secondary employment, conflicts of interest, all of those sorts of things as well.
Especially when it's a government job, you can't do much. Right? I relate to that.
That's right. And you want to obviously, build trust and build that relationship with your community as well. And if you're like, oh, look, I'm really sorry, but, I spend half of my time doing something else that's not really related, not that I wouldn't say it's related, but that is kind of, my own career, then you're kind of not giving people the time and energy and effort that they deserve.
Especially when you go for such public roles, it's a 200% effort. There is no such thing as half doing it. Really.
That's right.
And as I said, like the health factor, that was the thing that really struck me because I was reading your biography. I'm like, there's a lot for us to talk about.
Yes,
especially in the health, man. Like this, it's a headache because for me, it's like the moment I got through med school, I dislike the idea of a hospital. I don't like the hospital. Yep. Too chaotic. I don't get to follow up with the patient. I don't know the patient that well. All the training programs take so long.
Yes.
I cannot. So I'm like, let me just get into GP because we grew up here. And as you said before, you owe something to the community, right? Yeah. You owe it to the community. We grew up here. We have our church. Everyone's around. And like Dr. Zaha is around here. He's a family friend. I'm literally going to start practicing with him in 2 months.
Yeah,
right? I did my medical school placement with him and I'm going back to do my registrar training, right? And I know for a fact, once I finish whatever I have, we'll be back here to serve more.
Yep.
So, but I can see the challenges of being a GP in such areas.
Yes, absolutely.
Like bulk billing is dying for sure. It's a huge factor. And I see it day in, day out, patients coming in. They can't afford the gap for us. But the thing is you can't start a wait. Like you continue churning through a lot of new GPs and they get burnt out and they move to other areas. Yeah. That's the problem that we have at the moment.
Yes.
And I talked to my senior supervisor I work at Linnea just around the corner, so it's not too far.
Yeah.
And a lot of times he says we can choose to sort of get a gap in, charge a gap, because we do good medicine. Like in the beginning, the first 2 months I was practicing a quick burnout. Yeah. And the reason being is because I was doing quick medicine. Yeah. In and out, flu, no one was, medical certificate. Then I realized I can see why people start hating the job. Yep. I've met a lot of miserable GPs in their 50s because they're like, this is not fun. And the reason why is because they don't have the ability to spend quality time with their patients because they're demanded it's a 15-minute consult or less than 20 minutes and move on to the next one.
That's
right.
And
that's a problem. The PBS or the PBS items have not really caught up with general practitioners yet. They demand of more of the graduates to become general practitioners. But how can you do it when you're not giving them an incentive? Yeah. For example, 5 years ago, they would have had 2,000 or 3,000 applicants coming into general practice training. Now there's 1,000 applicants for 1,000 places. So we're losing more and more interest in the most, I believe, is the most vital specialty in medicine.
Well, GPs, and this is quite unique to the Australian system, right? GPs are basically the gateway to our broader medical system. Whether it is to allied health, whether it's to specialists, whether it's to other types of care, GPs are the ones that kind of facilitate that entry and that access into other aspects of the healthcare. But you're right that, we really need to rethink how our system works. to account for some of the challenges that we're seeing at the moment. So, for example, I was reading an article earlier this week that was talking about how, we should actually remove the requirement for people who
wake up.
Stop now. We should remove the requirement for people who take sick leave to have to produce a doctor's certificate. And that's precisely because, one of the things that you mentioned is the thing that you do in 15 minutes, you sign a medical certificate for someone who, has taken a day or 2 days or whatever off work. And that's all well and good, but it kind of takes away from one of the things that people love about the work that they do.
Exactly.
Right? Which is it challenging to me? Is it stuff that actually expands my my knowledge? Is it something that inspires my curiosity? Is it something that makes me connect with people? And these are all things that if you're just seeing people in 15-minute increments and you sort of, see the same type of issue, or you see people at their worst day in, day out, then you kind of lose that magic, you lose that enjoyment for it. And sometimes I talk to my staff here because we often see people who are, in a very challenging space because of whatever has happened in their life. And, often people come to their local MP because they don't know where else to go, right? They've tried accessing support through other mechanisms. It hasn't worked, or, there's been a problem in the system that's meant that they've lost out. So that's why they've come to see their local MP. And so sometimes they get frustrated. Sometimes they display less than ideal behavior, or sometimes they share stories that are incredibly distressing to hear.
Wow.
And if you're not prepared for it, if you
not trained for it as well,
if you're not trained for it, then it can become really difficult. And so one of the things, and we were supposed to do this last week, but I remembered at the last minute that my staff were at training, so the office was shut last week. They were actually doing vicarious trauma training.
Wow.
Because often when people share really distressing things, they can experience the trauma inspired by hearing the story.
I think it's called transference.
Transference or vicarious trauma. So it's basically you experience the distress and the lack of well-being from hearing a person's story. Like, you haven't experienced the event, but you hear the story, and so you experience the emotions, which is very, very difficult if you're not trained for it, if you're not, if you don't know what to do. And so I can imagine for doctors or for other people at the front line of the healthcare system, having someone, trauma dump on you 15 minutes, and then you're like, cool, here's a medical certificate.
Yeah, and then next one, and you got to reset.
Yeah.
You got to reset, and that's the problem. You have days that I come in, I'm like, this is a cool day, hopefully. And then half an hour after, it just turns into chaos. You just don't know. That's what you get trained for. And I feel like our areas, if you really want to be a good clinician, regardless of any health factor, really, this is the best place to be. This is the best place to be. And
it's where we need people, right? There are more GPs who are retiring from the system in this area. And there are also less people coming into work in the area, but we're also experiencing exponential growth, more growth than ever before.
Oh, yeah.
So it's where you want to be if you know that you will have work until
absolutely.
For as long as possible, right? But then going back to what you were saying about the way that the system is structured, some people are floating ideas like, should we actually, make it so that if someone needs evidence or whatever that you are unwell or whatever it might be, you just sign a stat dec instead. It's equally valid as a legal document.
Exactly.
So you sign a stat dec instead of, going to the GP. Sometimes if you have a flu, or like I did, I had food poisoning last week, the last thing you want to do is go and sit in a doctor's office when you just need some sleep, or you just need to kind of...
I think that's where telehealth is becoming more of a thing as well. Telehealth is helping with sort of streaming, or mainstreaming at least, the two things. Medical certificates and three things: medical certificates, referrals, and just rescripts or scripts for. I don't need to see patients for that sort of stuff. I really don't need to. And when I noticed that there's a bit more, when I started doing that more, I realized that I have more time to focus on some good medicine. Right? Yep. Again, it's a very busy area. 2 months ago, I was not fully booked. Now you have 40 patients a day to see. So you can get quite burnt out, right?
Absolutely.
But I don't know, like where do you see yourself in terms of, or what do you see the health sector heading into? Is it heading into more of a private enterprise eventually? Because that's a discussion that a lot of people are thinking. It could head into more of the American sort of styled medicine.
Yeah. Look, I think it's ultimately it is a series of choices about what we want the outcomes to be.
Exactly.
Right? Because everyone is going to tell you what they want from the system. But I think as decision makers, as people who are responsible for the overall structure of the system, we really have to say, what do we want to see the system produce? What do we want to see as the outcomes of the system? And I think for me, the really simple message is we want a system that keeps people well.
Yeah.
The kind of one of the complicating factors, if I can call it that, is we obviously have a healthcare system that is split across two levels of government. There's a lot of primary healthcare that's funded by the federal government, which is where things like preventative healthcare sits. And we also have the acute end of the spectrum. So this is, what people do in an emergency, what they do when they're very unwell. And that's like our hospital system, which is funded by the state government.
Okay.
So because we do have that kind of, multiple stakeholder system, and then within that we have things like community healthcare. We have the newer sort of ideas around, for example, in mental health, the value of peer support and peer-based care rather than just clinical intervention and things like that. So we've got, a system with many, many moving parts, and we ultimately have to make sure that the parts are working together and working together as well as they can be. And we're looking across the spectrum. We're looking at, how the most efficient care is also producing well people, and it's also something that I'm really passionate about is equity, and it's also a system that is equitable and accessible, and people are actually sort of aware of how to access care and all of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot that kind of goes into it. I think by and large we do have some big challenges to address so that we can shape what the system looks like, so that we continue to keep people well. I think for me, because I value equity so much, the last thing that I want to see is a healthcare system that is only functioning for those who can afford care, and because I think that would be a really terrible outcome. That's right. That would be a really terrible outcome. And it would also affect people in our area the most, right? Because often at the moment, because of cost of living issues, our people are the ones who are making that choice between medicines for themselves or food for their children, or, like buying their kids books and uniforms and all of these sorts of things. They're making very, very difficult choices. That's causing a lot more stress and pressure on them. And so if you then make a system that is make the system harder to access by making it more expensive to access, our people are the ones that are going to suffer. It's not going to be the people who can already afford to absorb gap fees and all of this kind of stuff, but it's our people that are going to suffer, which I would not want to see.
Because I remember, sorry to cut you off. There's I was having a chat with a family friend that I'll be doing my rotation with next, and I was like, man, you've got two clinics. How are you still affording bulk billing? Because a lot of people can't. Yeah. He's like, if I don't do that, I'm going to lose everyone. Yeah. I'm going to lose my patient base. I'm going to lose everyone, people who cannot afford paying. Yeah. So he just accepted the fact that he just needs to do that. Otherwise, it's not feasible for him to do anything apart from bulk billing. And the other one that I worked with, he had to shut down 2 clinics in the last 12 months. Yeah. He just couldn't.
Which is just, again, like, how... But it also then begs the question: how do we be more effective and efficient in the way that we're allocating our healthcare resources?
I mean, you've got more enterprises and corporations now coming in and opening up clinics. Like, you've got My Health Clinic, you've got all these bigger sort of stuff. And I don't know if this is a long-term successful outcome for the medical workforce or not, because, like, I've seen the numbers that some of the GPs get offered, and why wouldn't you take it up when you've just finished off your training? You're 6-7 years out. You've got huge debt. You're probably about to get married, or you've got a mortgage. Some of these contracts have huge numbers on them. And I can see the appeal to a lot of the GPs that just have finished their training.
Yep.
Yet they get burnt out quicker in those clinics because all you're seeing is just quick medicine. There's no continuity of care whatsoever. Yep. So we're back to square one, which is we need more community centres, we need more community clinics, right? But how can we incentivize the GPs to stick around and not move to areas where they can they can charge $120 for the same consult?
That's right.
Because that's what they're doing now. They move to the North Shore, they move to these city areas where I can do the exact same job, right, for more money. And that's what it comes down to, a lot of these people, unfortunately.
Yep.
But then I've sort of arrived at a conclusion. I'm like, no, I'd rather continue doing what I'm doing, which is good medicine, good care. It takes a couple of more minutes just to ask those extra questions and the patients care about them and they'll come back and see me. I'll deal with chronic patients, right, which means I'm less likely to see the acute, fast-track medicine, and I get to still enjoy my life. And that's what I've sort of arrived to as a conclusion now. Yet what's hard about it is it's chronic medicine. It's challenging medicine. It's not easy. But that's the kind of challenge at the moment. It's interesting. It's a very interesting challenge, but we'll see with these corporations where the medicine's going to take off. That's a big thing.
It's they're all sort of very important points that you've raised, and I think from the other side of the coin, right? Like, how do you prevent certain areas or certain things from just becoming money sinks, right? Like you kind of look at how much we obviously how much we invest in, and I say invest very deliberately. I don't say how much we spend, because healthcare is an investment, right? Like if you have a healthy, well population, then you save spending on a whole range of down the track issues, right? This is why I'm a very big fan of preventative healthcare, but I'm also very cognizant of the fact that a system like Medicare, which was, amazing and very, very suitable for when it was first introduced in the 70s. And I think just last year, I think we celebrated the 40th anniversary of Medicare in its current form.
It's amazing.
But it was actually introduced 10 years previously by the Whitlam government.
I think it was Medibank by then. Was it Medibank and then they turned to Medicare?
Yeah, it was Medibank.
And then
so
privatised.
And this is where I'm going to do a bit of political history, right? Yeah. So the Whitlam government, and Gough Whitlam was actually the member for Werriwa, which is here.
Oh, yeah.
So he was from here. He lived in Cabramatta. He was the first Prime Minister from out this way. And he had only 3 years in government, but his years, next year is actually the 50th anniversary of the completion of the Whitlam government, or the dismissal of the Whitlam government. So he was in office for 3 years. He introduced some incredible reforms. He made university free. He introduced Medibank, which was easily access to healthcare. He did something incredibly basic by introducing urban planning or a portfolio for cities. So actual indoor plumbing. So if you think of the western suburbs of Sydney from, say, past Granville out this way, extending sewer lines so that Western Sydney had indoor plumbing, Gough Whitlam did.
Wow.
So these sorts of really basic things that actually gave people in Western Sydney the quality of life came from a government that was only there for 3 years, 50 years ago. And what actually happened was, once he introduced Medibank, the government that immediately followed him tried to repeal it. So they actually wound it back.
Wow.
And then the Hawke government, which followed that government, brought it back as Medicare.
My understanding is that whoever holds the government seats holds the Medicare. That's my understanding of it. That's what I've been told, is that the most popular, the party, if they want to remain in power, or they remain as the popular power, they got to remain. They got to keep pushing with the Medicare.
Yes, and this is what this kind of back and forth shows you, right? Like, people value healthcare, people recognise the importance of universal access to healthcare, and people value investment into healthcare, and that's a Labor, Liberal, whatever. That's a population-wide kind of don't touch Medicare kind of thing, and but as an idea, universal healthcare actually predates that. And one of my political heroes is a guy called Nye, or Aneurin Bevan, who was Welsh. So he was the Minister for Health in the first post-war British government. So 1940s, late 1940s, he became the British Minister for Health.
Oh, wow.
And he came from a region of Wales in the UK, which was a coal mining region. So lots of people who had very labour-intensive jobs, very kind of big impact on healthcare. Because if you imagine working in coal mines, huge impact on your respiratory system.
Exactly.
Lots of people who are experiencing not just respiratory issues, but a whole range of health impacts. And as a community, what his area did was they actually started an idea around combined health insurance. So every person in this region, it started in their council area, right? So every person in this council region put in money, and the money that they collected, people who experienced health issues could tap into that money to access healthcare.
Oh.
Right? So it was the first iteration of what we now call universal healthcare. So everyone invests a little bit so that the people who are genuinely ill, the people who really need access to healthcare, tap into that money. And
Wow.
that's where it started. And he then took the idea that came from his council area, his small community in Wales, and he turned it into the NHS, the National Health Service.
Okay.
So he was the architect of the British NHS, when he was health minister, and that's part of the reason why he's one of my political heroes, because he basically looked at something that was in his community and said, this is actually fantastic. Doesn't matter that these people are supposedly low socio-income, high labour-intensive jobs. It's not coming from a policy person. It's not coming from a university who's suggesting this or whatever. But a group of people said, we see this as a need. We've sort of trialed this solution to it. Looks like it's going pretty well. And he went, hey, that's actually a really great idea. Let's take this to the whole country. And now, 70 years later, it is, something that has influenced the health systems of not just Australia, but many, many other parts of the world. Yeah. So it's an incredibly powerful thing. But again, like I said, what was an idea from the late 40s and then implemented in Australia in the 70s and 80s, we need to kind of go, okay, cool. How can we take that principle of universal access to healthcare? How can we actually bring that into our current needs, the current challenges that we have as a system, and what does that look like? So I don't pretend I have the immediate answers, but what does that look like?
Yeah, I was going to add that back onto online, online medicine, telehealth. I think that's probably the next step is how to bring it into this world. But I was going to ask you probably 20 minutes ago, but I forgot.
I'm so sorry.
I'm just trying to pay attention to everything you guys talking about. Could telehealth or online medicine, as it expands, because it's expanding, obviously you guys will know, expanding at a very it's exponential. Could it actually be more of a threat than a tool that doctors can use?
It's a very good question, and to be honest, there's a sort of double-edged sword to a lot of things, right? There has to be checks and balances and just as there is in sort of in-person medical care as well. Yeah. There has to be checks and balances, and there has to be alternatives for people who are not digitally or virtually connected. I get this reminder every so often, because sometimes it's so easy to just fall into the trap of thinking, we're in the 21st century, everyone's got access to the internet, et cetera, et cetera. And so I always appreciate when I'm reminded of the fact that there are people who have poor access to the internet. There are people that live in what we call digital deserts, which is where they've either got poor connections or, they can't afford internet for a whole range of reasons, or they just kind of are comfortable in the way that they've always lived, and that hasn't included access to the internet or to digital connections. And so we really need to make sure that in our kind of rush to incorporate virtual healthcare and digital access to consultations and things like that, we don't forget about the people that don't have access to that infrastructure. A few weeks ago, I was door knocking in Cartwright, and I spoke to this lovely lady who has lived in the area for 50, 60 years, and she was like, I feel like I don't know what's happening in Liverpool anymore. I used to get the newspaper all the time, but the newspaper doesn't exist, and so I just don't know what's happening.
Wow.
And I was like, that is a really good reminder that, for example, a lot of people have felt the loss of a physical newspaper. So when during COVID, we lost our 2 local newspapers in physical form. So the Liverpool Leader and the Liverpool Champion used to be delivered every Wednesday.
That's
and I remember
right. I remember because it's chucking in front of the house. And
exactly. So, they were one of the casualties of COVID. They lost advertising revenue. There was obviously a whole range of issues around, sending things like that and transmission and all of this kind of stuff. So the Liverpool Leader has remained as like an online only or a digital only newspaper, but the Champion folded completely. But then, for people like Faye, who I door knocked, she was like, yeah, look, I don't really know what's happening anymore because there's no internet. Or sorry, there's no newspaper and I'm not on the internet. We all know of people who live in digital blind spots, right? So, I know family friends of mine who say, they've got to go to, their in-laws' house or, another family member's place to do their homework because where they are is a digital blind spot and they can't get access to the internet. So,
but look, I mean, within the next coming, 2 generations, those, I think everything's going to be digitalized.
A lot will, but it's like this, right? Just because something becomes more prevalent and, the infrastructure becomes more available and all of that kind of stuff, it doesn't mean that it is necessarily going to completely replace something else. And the example that I made with newspapers is a really good one, right? Because now what happens is let's say you take something simple like advertising. 30, 40 years ago, you didn't really have the internet. And so you would have just advertised in the newspaper or on TV or, whatever it was. But then since the internet's come around, you've got social media, you've got a whole range of different ways of advertising platforms across different platforms. But the big takeaway from me is that, of that shift in technology and that sort of thing is just because internet has come about
doesn't mean it's going to abolish the rest of the...
That's right. It means that people have had to look at how they advertise across all platforms, including non-digital ones, rather than just straight swapping out non-digital advertising for digital advertising. And I think it's going to be similar across a whole range of different things where rather than it being a straight swap out, it's going to have to be an and thing.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever lose a human touch in our medical field because you need it. That's just how it is.
And have robots as doctors, I guess.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, AI is becoming more and more intelligent, but I don't know if we can replace humans ever. That'll be so scary, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know. That's why I had telehealth on my mind for a while, because it's like what we saw. What was before newspapers? What was before? Was newspapers like the first thing?
It was like TV, like channel.
Yeah.
No, newspapers predate that.
There you go. Yeah.
So whatever was before newspapers, newspapers took over. So I guess
probably like cave art.
Yeah, it was like
they scream across the street. But so I don't know. That's what I see is that I honestly do believe in the next probably 20, 30 years everything's going to be digital, and I think it's going to be a real kind of paradox to whether we should put funding into online medicine and that's going to degrade actual medicine. But look, I don't know. I mean,
I think it's like you were saying before, right? I think online medicine does have a place and a role to play in making things more effective and kind of improving access and care where needed, right? So, for example, it's going to make a huge difference for people in rural and remote regions.
That's the majority of my calls are from these areas.
Yeah, and places where, it actually really adds value to people's access to care, their ability to navigate those long distance and things like that. Where we've got to be a little bit more mindful and intentional in terms of how we apply it is what you've identified in terms of the quick stuff, right? Because when you're not physically seeing someone, there's a sort of gap in there's an information gap, right? Because when you're like seeing someone in person, the way that you communicate, only 10% of that is the verbal communication that you undertake.
Exactly.
The 90% is the body language, it's the environment, it's the other stuff that they're not telling you, but you're picking up as a result. When you look at virtual care, when you look at digital care, you don't necessarily have that information of the other 90% of the context. So as a clinician, as a professional, and even in terms of how we structure the system, we're going to have to really kind of make people intentionally look at how they're going to fill in that 90% of information that they're not quite getting without seeing the person in person. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's very challenging.
Yeah.
It's so challenging because, like, for me, I have to like rule out: is this guy needs to go to hospital or not? Like, literally, like it's a 30-second consult, or sometimes even a minute. I'm like, all right. I ask one question. Usually, a couple of questions gives it to me if he's really stable or not at home. Yeah. Sometimes you can even hear it in their voice, but you have to be well trained for this sort of stuff. It's not something that you can just like pick up. And there's been instances where I had to call an ambulance for a patient. It was in Adelaide.
Yep.
That's how bad it was. And I still remember that one. I called her and she was like, what was the story? It was like something along the line of she's not safe around her child. She's had not postmenopausal. She just gave birth like 6 weeks ago. And
postnatal.
Yeah, I think it was postnatal depression, and it was leading more into more of a self-harm. And not psychosis, but more self-harm and suicidal, right? But it was more, she doesn't feel safe around her baby. I'm on the way in Sydney. I'm like, just give me a sec. I had to put her on hold. I had to call the ambulance because she was just calling up to renew her script for the antidepressant.
Yeah.
So how did you clock that? How did you?
All I asked was like, do you feel safe? I'm like, no. I'm like, there we go. Okay, that's enough for me. That was just a check. It was just check. You're just checking boxes. 99% of the times it's good, but that 1%, if you miss it, that person could harm anyone, and you can get in trouble because you never responded. So I had to call ambulance interstate for her to get checked on. And they called me and she was on the phone with me, the paramedic. She's like, no, everything is good. Her husband just took time off from work. I'm like, good, someone needs to be home with them.
Yeah.
And if she had not accessed the telehealth, she could have easily have hurt herself or hurt the baby, right? So that's more of an advantage for us, right? But not everyone can do that. Like the company that I'm aware of, they go through 35 to 45 interviews a week just to handpick the ones that can identify these sort of stuff, right? And unfortunately, we have so many different clinicians coming into the field. You have the international ones that are not trained locally, who are not trained the right way or not trained the way they should be trained. Even it doesn't have to be medicine. It could be nursing. It could be occupational therapists. It could be physios. A lot of people come in from overseas, and you have these huge influx of people coming in with a variety of skills that potentially do not transfer over to our current population, which is a challenge. So I don't know how good it is, but I think we're quite good. We're tight with our qualification in Australia. Where we have to ensure that the person ticks the boxes of what we need out of them before they join the forces. And I'm very glad. I'm very glad that we're becoming more and more aware of the variety of things that we can deliver to the general population. So
in any profession, regardless if it's one where like you're kind of with people all the time, or one where you're less with people. Your technical knowledge and skills are one aspect of your role, but they actually mean nothing unless you can communicate, unless you can share that knowledge and,
absolutely right.
and kind of, take it beyond sort of your brain and actually sort of take that knowledge and communicate it to the next step. And I say this because one of my previous jobs was running professional development courses for STEM professionals. So engineers, scientists, IT professionals, and this was and I do that as kind of like a job preparation thing, or like or workplace preparation stuff when they were in their third and fourth year of their degree. So they were about to go and do cadetships or their final year placements before they then applied for graduate roles and things like that. And the number of times, particularly engineers, the number of times they would be like, yeah, but I have like a degree. What more do they want? And I'm like, cool. Like you have whatever degree it is from whatever prestigious institution
No one cares.
But can you actually share your knowledge, right? Because you're most likely to be working in multidisciplinary teams with people that don't have the same shorthand as you. So if you can't break something down and, share and communicate your knowledge and, your technical skills to people that don't necessarily come from the same backgrounds or people that don't necessarily have that same shorthand or same it's almost like a professional language, right?
Yeah.
That people that don't have the same professional language as you, then are your skills and knowledge, are they actually beneficial? Like, are they actually doing what you need them to if that communication piece isn't there? And so, like, my favorite question was, like, let's say you're applying for a graduate role, right? And you're applying for, there's 6 positions and you're one of 1,000 applicants.
Yeah, you're going to step down, right?
Yeah, what is it about you and what can you tell people that makes you one of those 6 people that should get the graduate role? And like literally everyone would say, oh, but like I've got a degree from X prestigious university. And I'm like, cool, look around the room. There's like 100 of you in this room at least.
What makes you special?
There's, 7 universities just in Sydney. There's more across the state. There's more across Australia. There's more internationally. How many people are going to walk through that door and kind of go, I've got an engineering degree from, Harvard or from Oxford or from like whatever other even more prestigious institution, but that's not what people look for. People look for the fact that
human skills, the human interaction. 80% of it is just human interaction, man. No one cares. Like, and I agree with that one thing because I've got a few boys that are trying to they sort of trying to get into the training programs for orthopedics and ENT.
Yep.
The toughest, perhaps the toughest. In ENT is by far the toughest to get into.
Yeah. He's
like, man, like it's like running for presidency. Literally, it's like running, especially orthopedics, because orthopedics is more like the jockey, like sort of training sort of thing. It's not. They don't care about they don't care about like the research. They care about, are you good with people, man? And that's what I've noticed. Like I met the guy that got in 3 years ago. I was in my final year medical school, and I met the guy. He was also he was like a Bondi, pretty much. And I was with him the day he received his application. And at that time, I was like considering it. So I asked him, like, dude, how'd you get in? He's like, bro, I ran for presidency for like 4 years. He's like. It was just literally people had to know you and people had to like you. That's all it took. That's what a lot of the times it comes down to those human to human touch. No one cares about what you know because I can teach you what you need to know for the job. And the more nicer you are and the more down to earth you are and the more humble you are, the more likely you'll get along with people.
Yeah.
And the more hands will be offered to you along the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think people forget about that the moment you get a degree or a title or whatever it is. The ego part, it plays a big role in it. And I've seen some wonderful and amazing people out there lose opportunities because of that, or they get shafted to the sideline because no one wants to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's across any profession, right? Whether really. It's, healthcare or even, politics.
Like politics is crazy. Like it's all about human to human, like interaction. It's literally how well you allow people to like you.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you rely on it so much, right? And I think there was one thing that we want to talk about, which was your journey into politics. Like, how did you get into that? That's interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's because a lot of people actually say, look, I thought you had to be a lawyer to be a politician. Yeah. I am proof that you don't have to be a lawyer.
There you go.
There are a lot. I have to say, there are a lot of lawyers in Parliament, and there are a lot of lawyers just more broadly in politics. But you don't necessarily have to be a lawyer in order to be a politician. So I actually grew up in a family that wasn't really politically engaged or involved. I have to say, when we were kids, like sometimes I would overhear my dad and his friends talking about, the politics at the time. So like the Prime Minister or, who was doing what, et cetera, et cetera. And so I always had this, like my dad loved Paul Keating. So he used to kind of, talk about him in glowing terms kind of thing. But when I was in high school, I wasn't sort of your typical like SRC or prefect or, school captain kind of kid. I was really low key. But I just was really genuinely curious and I loved learning about people, about, how things work, all of that kind of stuff. And so when I went to uni, I went straight into a time of a lot of change and not necessarily in a way that I thought was good, right? So I said before, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is equity and making sure that, like, as we look at the opportunities that the next generation have, we're actually actively looking at, reaching a hand out and pulling people up rather than pulling the ladder up behind us, right? And saying, well, I've had these opportunities now, good for you guys, but I'm closing the door. Like, I think that is a very dangerous thing to do, and it's not good for our community and our society as a whole. Like, it's just not an effective way of being. But when I was kind of, finishing uni and finishing school, starting university, there was a lot of debate and discussion around some of the things that the Howard government at the time was doing, right?
That was around the time we arrived. You were born here, 2007.
Yeah.
We came in 2005, so it was around the time that Howard government was just still active.
Yeah, that's right. They were making a lot of changes, and one of the big changes that they were making was around changes to people's workplace rights, and so there was huge campaigns that were run by unions around stopping those changes, and they got lots of attention, and there was lots of conversations that were generated as a result of those. And so at uni, I just started uni then as well. So at uni, we were talking about a lot of these things, and I was talking about something really local, like, my courses being cancelled, or, not being able to do, particular things at the next semester. And I was just whinging about it in one of my tutorial classes, and I was like, I can't believe the university would do this. And one of my classmates was like, yeah, look, I agree with you. That's really terrible. But what are you going to do about it? And that question has always really stuck with me, right? So it was the first time someone had been like, it was almost like, if you're not going to do something about it, then why are you complaining?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's not to say that, like, I don't complain anymore. I do a lot. But I also, I like to kind of go, okay, cool, like, what can I do about it? And so my classmate was like, look, I'm running for the Student Representative Council with, a group of others. Here are the things that we're doing. Do you want to, do you want to be part of our ticket? Or do you want to be part of our team? And I never really thought about it. So I was like, cool, like, this seems really interesting. Spoke to a few people and decided to kind of, go for it. And as a result of getting elected to the Student Representative Council, I had like a, very junior burger position. But as a result of being on the Student Representative Council that year, that, like, I would say that year was just absolutely eye-opening for me. So there was a broader agenda of change within the university. So they were trying to introduce...
Was it USW?
Yeah, it was. So they were trying to introduce trimesters. So this was like the first time they tried to introduce it, like, 16 years ago. And so they were like cutting the course. We had semesters back, 14-week semesters back then.
Oh, yeah.
So they were trying to cut them back to 11 weeks. They were, cutting a whole bunch of courses out. They were reducing the number of majors you could do, a whole bunch of different things.
It's just a business. Like they'll do what suits them in terms of the income. So
pretty much. Yeah. But then, so what we did was we developed a student survey, and we basically, collected heaps of survey responses about the impact of these changes would have on people's degrees, would have on their course learnings, would have on a whole range of different factors. So we had a number of measures. We put the results of that survey into a report, and we actually worked with one of our, like, staff supporters, or like one of the staff who was we were working with, to develop an alternative model, right? So we developed what was called the 12 weeks in 13 model. So rather than cutting it straight down to an 11-week semester from 14 weeks, which is basically like a reduction of a quarter of the course content, we basically pitched to the university as a system where you would basically have a 12-week semester, but the first week would just be lectures. So your tutorials would start from the second week. Okay. But the first week would be more of like an introductory week, and then your lectures would end in, say, week
11,
week
rather
12, and then the 13th week would be your final tutorial.
Oh, okay. All right.
just
So
kind
you're
of
still
like
going into 13-week sort of thing.
yes, but just kind of splitting it across sort of thing. And we pitched that as an alternative. We basically also organised like a sit-in outside the library so that we could actually give people an outlet for their frustrations and to kind of, you know, raise their voice to the university as well. So it wasn't just like a behind closed doors, here's what we're doing, but we basically, we engaged the student body in terms of, hey, these are the changes, this is what it might mean for you, how do you feel about them, what do you want to say, etc. And so as a result of doing all of that work for that year, and we won. Right?
Oh, wow.
So like the university actually took that on board. And so as a that was the most important part. Because we could do all this work and they could have come back and been like, yeah, cool, story, bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
They're usually like that, though.
This is true, but like it showed me the importance of like an organised campaign actually being really strategic in the way that you want to affect change and the value of engaging as many people as possible, and that communication piece as well. So all of those things were kind of really great learning experiences in terms of enacting effective change. And so I really loved, you know, all of the things that we were doing in terms of the SRC. And so, and I also, like the person who was the president that year became a really good mentor of mine. So we had very sort of similar journeys. She, you know, she was the child of Vietnamese refugees. She'd grown up in Cabramatta, and she would like frequently kind of, you know, give me a lift home from uni. And, you know, we're just really kind of getting to know her journey and really kind of getting to see that, you know, people like us, people from like our part of the world could be leaders, could do these really cool things. And, you know, we could put ourselves out there was actually a really great lesson. And so at the end of that year, she sort of said, look, you know, what are your plans for next year? And I kind of went, well, just finishing my degree. And then she was like, what do you think about running to be president of the SRC? And I was like, I had never thought about it. And so she put the seed in my head and she really encouraged me to put my hand up. And I kind of went, yeah, okay, cool, like I'll do it. And again, had a really great year in terms of like learning a lot. And that was also just after a change of federal government as well. So we were also doing a lot of work in terms of changes to HECS, changes to the student services and amenities fee. So there was like a lot happening in the higher education space, you know, that year as well. And so, you know, again, it really inspired me to sort of, you know, work with people and kind of get involved in the Labor Party at that time because, you know, my mentor, Fung, she was a member. A lot of the people who I'd, you know, been working with on the Student Representative Council were members of the Labor Party. And so they were like, oh, would you like to kind of, you know, come along, see what it's all about? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. And the rest is kind of history. Pretty much. So again, going back to your thing about it's all about the networks, who you're exposed to, people and the conversations that you have. And so after joining the party, I got very involved in Young Labour, ended up being Vice President of Young Labour. And as a result of being involved locally, my predecessor as a member for Liverpool basically, you know, approached me, and again, this was like kind of randomly, and was just like, how do you feel about being part of our council ticket or being part of our council group? And I have to say, like in the sort of early 2000s, so about 10 years ago now, you know, and this is where like politics is a cycle, right? Like, you know, sometimes some parties are popular, other times they're really not. 10 years ago, the Labor Party was not popular at all. And it was...
What was the reason at that time?
So it was around the whole, like there was a lot of change that happened with, you know, the Rudd-Gillard government. It was also the end of the Labor Party being in state government previously. So there was just a lot of...
transition and...
a lot of negativity around at that time. And it was... it was also like, you know, time for a change. And
it takes time for humans to forget anyway. So he was just like, pretty much.
You know, it takes time to figure things out and that kind of stuff. And so I really had to be intentional about why I was joining, why I remained a member, because it would have been, you know, reasonably easy for me to be like, oh, I disagree with what these people are doing. I disagree with what's happening here. And I don't like XYZ, therefore I'm just going to leave. Like I have a health qualification. I could have, gone and worked in a different part of the country. I could have gone overseas. Like, there's a certain intentionality to it. But for me, like I said to you, some of my core values are equity, making sure that people, regardless of where they start out in life, have an opportunity to succeed. And the second is around curiosity. So, people, when I say that, people are always like, oh, but curiosity killed the cat. And I'm like, no, I'm curious in the sense that I really want to sort of learn about how things work to make them better and to see how they can be made better. And so for me, there we go. So for me, the Labour story is always about looking at how we can build equity in our society, and particularly, people our way who don't have the natural advantages of, wealth and connections and, being from, a connected space initially, how we can actually get a shot at changing our lives within the space of a generation. Like, I very much reflect on the fact that, like, in most parts of the world, not many, in most parts of the world, even, the country of my birth, the idea that I could go from being a migrant to a member of parliament in less than one generation is...
It's crazy.
Yeah.
I remember when we talked about it last time with the boys we went, I'm like, there's something called the ethnic dream. There's the American dream and there's an ethnic dream. And I feel like this country is a pure sort of example of it. Like I don't know, like that, like where we've come from and where we've been, I feel like it should be served as an inspiration to anyone out there, because what this country offers is just endless opportunities. Yeah. You just have to go for it. That's exactly literally right. Just go for it. Yeah. Create I remember when we first sat and decided, okay, why are we doing this podcast? I'm like, dude, what was it? Just networking. It was nothing. It was just networking.
Networking and a brand as well.
We wanted to create a local brand where people can come and talk to us about their general issues, their general sort of I guess their journey in life, right?
Absolutely.
And that itself will serve as an inspiration to a lot of people out there. And like part of yourself, it's the fact that you just started as just a simple student at university and somehow you found your way.
Yeah, that's right. And like I was saying before, I never, like, the idea, if you had asked me when I graduated from school, from high school, back at the end of 2005, what I would be doing in 10, 15 years' time, I would have said I probably would be working in healthcare. One of my classmates who I ran into a couple of years ago was like, "Oh, I thought you'd marry like some IT dude and like kids or whatever." And maybe that would have been my life or whatever. But I think that it has to be a few of those things coming together. So firstly, it's about working. Yeah. For me, it was working out my own values and working out having that political consciousness.
Yes, and passion. Yeah.
The passion and the values as well, because I say to people constantly who are like, oh, I don't really know in terms of like, a political allegiance, or like, I don't really kind of know Labour, Liberal, whatever, or, Greens, whatever. And I always say, look, it's not about partly it's about the connections that you make, but you have to, when it comes to like, being politically active and involved and all of that kind of stuff, there are going to be very challenging times. And if you don't have anything to motivate you as your purpose and the meaning behind what you're doing, if you don't have that core of like, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing and these are the values that are driving me, then it is so easy to just kind of go like, I'm done. Yeah, no,
you're absolutely
right. Because you've got to make really challenging decisions, and often the first step towards change isn't going to be the one that you think is where you should end. Right? Like
it's the ideal one.
You're not going to get 100% of what you want at the first go, but even if you get 10% of what you think is a step in the right direction, then it's worth keeping on working so you get as close to the 100% as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a book, I think it's like The Power of Habit. What's it called? It's like Atomic Habits. And it talks about that 1% improvement every day, and that's what it takes. Like we were literally packing up the space. I'm like, dude, how did we get here? Just like, how did this happen? Like, we were just starting in our garage, man. How did this happen? Yeah. But it's amazing because you start creating all these beautiful stories and networks, and you walk away with far more like just pride that, you know, you're part of this community and you're doing so much. And even such a small change can mean such a huge impact for a lot of people out there that potentially can perhaps just go through a reel and watch us talk about something particular that they're interested in. But that's why I believe in, honestly. It's just the small, simple changes that you make day in, day out.
And it's the ripple down ones as well. Like, you know, I often kind of speak in Parliament about particularly young people, but just the things that I, you know, come across on you know, daily or weekly basis. And for my first speech to Parliament, I quoted the words of this young girl who was a children's parliamentarian the year before.
Oh, yeah.
So there's something called the 2168 Children's Parliament. I don't know if you guys have come across it. It's this excellent program where for the 12 or 13 schools in the 2168 area, each of them sends about 4 students to the Children's Parliament. And the Children's Parliament is an opportunity for them to go talk to their peers, their classmates about what issues they care about, you know, what they want them to take to the Children's Parliament. And they get to speak to you know, senior Department of Education officials, the mayor, the local members of Parliament.
Is there a 2171 or 2170?
You know, you can slide into the 2168. I reckon you should definitely come along to it, because it really inspires you, because these kids are like, you know, between 7 and 10, 11, right? And what the speech that will really stay with me because and resonate with me, because it reflects the journey and the experiences of so many other people in the community. So there was this young girl who was just like, you know, kids my age are sick of translating for their parents. When it comes to going to the doctors, to Centrelink, to hospitals, to all of these places, sometimes I get really frustrated because I don't know the words to use. And I don't know how to tell them what my parent is trying to share.
Wow.
And I was like, that is it, right? Like, these are the really core things. Like, this child is 7 or 8 years old, but what she's saying, her voice is valid. Like, what she's saying actually has ripple effects on people who are much older and all of that kind of stuff.
And don't have the help that they need.
That's right. Wow. That's exactly right. And so I quoted her in my inaugural speech to Parliament about why I care about the things that I do, the voices that I want to represent and elevate, and the things that keep me going on a daily basis. Because when I talk about equity, I'm not just talking about something that's, you know, pie in the sky, or it's just like a word, right? When I talk about equity, it is so people like that young girl don't need to sacrifice their childhood because our system doesn't have enough interpreters, so that we can actually kind of address some of those gaps. So I hope that young girl gets an opportunity to be a child, so that there's not the run-on effects of even the psychological impact for the parents. Because if you're an adult and you're reliant on your child to translate for you in, you know, medical situations with Centrelink or whatever, it can be a shameful experience, right? And it can cause a lot of embarrassment and that kind of stuff. And that's what, as an OT, we call role reversal or role change. And that can have like really disempowering impacts on people. It can make them feel really small. It can make them feel like they have no agency and no power in their own life. And that, like, once you think it, you become it, right? Like, it has such a flow-on impact. And so that's why I wanted to share her experience and make sure that when it comes to the decisions that we're making, whether it's in the Parliament or, you know, whether it's talking to people out on the street or, you know, in meetings with bureaucrats and things like that, these are the kinds of issues that, like, flesh out when I talk about a value.
Yeah.
That's what it means.
Absolutely. I think there was the one thing we came across in your biography was the fact that you and 20 other Parliament members signed the petition for what's happening right now in the Middle East. And that's a big discussion. We could talk about this for hours.
We could.
We'll probably have like 10, 15 minutes because we've been speaking for an hour and 22.
Gosh.
Yeah, no, you just forget about that time after a while.
You do.
What is your stand on this whole scenario that's happening in the Middle East? We have a lot of Middle Easterns in this area, and you know the shift. You've seen the shift. What is your approach to it, and what's your where do you stand on that sort of battleground? Battleground is one way to say it. Yeah.
It is, and look, I think it's always important to stand for justice, for truth, for if for stopping harm being done to really vulnerable.
It's a genocide. That's just the way to look at it, honestly. Yeah.
And when you look at some of the images that are coming out, when you look at the damage that is not just being done to people now, but for decades to come,
Absolutely.
right? Like the trauma and, you know, the impact of these things is going to be ongoing.
Absolutely.
I think it's really important to kind of have that as, you know, a focus front and center. What I'm also mindful of is making sure that when we talk, when we act, when we engage with our community, we're also looking at making sure we put social cohesion front and center of mind here. And so when I speak to people who are impacted by what they're seeing, who, you know, are very frustrated, I guess, by the fact that they can see what's happening there and it doesn't seem to be stopping and all of those sorts of things. And it feels, you know, really disempowering after a while, where you're just kind of, you know, you're signing petitions, you're doing this, you're doing that, but like things don't seem to be ending. It's really, I'm really mindful that at some point that frustration may turn into channeling of other emotions in other ways, that kind of thing. And I come from a background where I used to run anger management classes in schools, like amongst, you know, teenage boys and girls. And I know, right, that anger is a secondary emotion, right? There's anger always occurs because of something else. Yeah. And what we used to do in those classes is try and figure out what that underlying emotion was. Is someone angry and sort of lashing out in their anger because they're guilty about something? Are they scared of something? Are they, are they frustrated? Are they, worried? Or there's a whole range of different things that underlie anger and that sort of thing. And so what I'm really mindful of is when we talk and when we engage with people, we put that social cohesion front and center, because the reason why this country is so great, the reason why we can have the opportunities that we can, is because we live in a harmonious country where we work well with each other in spite of our differences,
absolutely right.
Because of our differences. But it's a fragile thing, and it only works because we're mindful and we put effort into maintaining that social cohesion, because of it would be so easy for people to kind of stay within their community groups and not make that reach out and learn about other people and engage with other people and do the things that are necessary to maintain that social cohesion. Absolutely. So I really want to encourage people to think about that aspect of it as well, especially given the last few months that we've had in Sydney in particular.
There's a lot that's been happening.
That's right.
Stabbing. I think the way, like, when I talk to a lot of the friends about it, it's just all they're seeing is it's a generational genocide, and that's what's happening at the moment in overseas, and no one's doing anything. No one. I feel like there's a lot of politicians that are just sitting back and not really making such an impactful sort of speeches or support. I don't know what's going on right now. Like, it's even, for example, America recently signed they condemned the ICC from trying to issue I think an arrest warrant against the Israeli president. Yeah, and they condemning all these behaviors, and it's disappointing to see such actions being taken against the oppressed. That's all I would say. There's not much we can only share our frustration by letters and words and etc. because we live so far away from all this. But we cannot forget that this is still actively happening all around the world.
What I would say though is, sometimes there are small silver linings of hope and examples where there's a lot of stuff happening underneath the surface that you may not necessarily see or hear about until it happens, right? So I use the example of Amal Clooney, right? So for months people were saying, what are you doing? Why aren't you speaking out about what's happening, et cetera, especially because of her cultural background, her family's experiences as refugees, and her status as a human rights lawyer. Yeah. And, so there was a lot of criticism around, leveled at her. And it turns out that she was actually working on the the ICC's case. So she was working So she was actually working as part of the ICC.
She couldn't speak out about it. She couldn't do much about it.
That's right. So she was one of the experts in terms of the panel who then issued the warrant, who then were part of like issuing the warrant.
But it's ridiculous how they've turned around and just condemning all this behaviour, and it's like you just there's unfortunately a lot of superpowers that run everything behind, like run these sort of scenes, and sometimes we forget that there's only so much you can do on a local level. You have to raise awareness across the whole population, and that takes time. I feel like what you, for example, and May and Ned are doing and sharing all these photos and videos, and that's small changes, but on the long run, it will wake up people. Just gives them a bit of a wake up call. Hey, this is happening. Don't forget, this was once your home country, or this is your home region. This is still happening just because you've escaped it or you've moved here and you think you're safe. Don't forget that this is all a privilege, and you still have to make an impact overseas.
And you also, like, you're in the privileged position of working with groups that are actually doing that real work on the ground.
Yeah.
So I was recently speaking with representatives from Palestinian Christians in Australia.
Oh, well, yeah.
And they're actually doing the work of helping those refugees who have come from Gaza, who and some of them have settled in the Liverpool area. Now they're practically supporting about 36 families in terms of providing them with housing, helping to provide them with clothing and a whole range of other things that they need, because they've left obviously with nothing.
I think we have something similar, right? Like the family does something similar, right?
Yeah, actually, I was gonna. We do when it comes to donating, that kind of stuff. But I was gonna mention like the effect that media has on it, because you mentioned that the superpowers control it, but I don't think they do. I think it's just the media. Like if the media doesn't want the story to be shared, or it's not like now all I'm saying is just like Donald Trump got arrested or something. Like that's all I'm saying. Donald Trump got in trouble with this, that. And I'm like, all right, but what about all these other stuff? So I feel like the media actually kind of facilitates what people believe.
Don't forget the media isn't government owned; it's all private as well. Channel 7, Channel 9, they're all privately owned. I
mean, bro, like you don't. It's more compartmentalized than most people think. I feel like it's a lot of like.
This is shared. This is not shared, because you're just attracting attention to certain things and making people forget about other stuff.
Look, I think and going back to what you're saying in terms of like the framing of things and who talks about what, it's very important to look at put things in historical context as well.
Yeah.
And this is why when you asked me this question, I started with highlighting the importance of looking for truth, justice, and
what is the objective truth in pretty much most of the stuff.
Or looking at different perspectives, because I think that especially at the moment where you do have a lot of opinion presented as news, it is very difficult to really kind of get a sense of like who's saying what perspective it's.
There's just too much information, too much influx.
That's right. But and I say that because for a long time that is the kind of that's the approach that I've had regardless of conflict.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you've put this up.
This looks very nice. I'm like, cool, I want you, like, we should try to end with this, because we're speaking for an hour and 30 minutes, man.
Well, I just want to share really briefly the story behind this and why I find this is so important, right? So when I decided that I didn't want to do politics and international relations as my major anymore, I actually switched to something else, which was Spanish and Latin American studies. And so I learned a lot about Latin America through the history of Latin America through colonization. And through its independence movements and its more recent history in terms of having a lot of military coups and the reaction from like again independence, pro-democracy movements and things like that, right? And so one of the about 10 years ago, my best friend and I, we decided that because we'd actually met in Spanish class, we decided that we were going to go and travel through South America. And it was just after I'd been through a really difficult time. And I remember I was in Santiago, Chile, and I'd obviously heard about the overthrow of the Salvador Allende government in the early 70s and, the impact that the Pinochet regime had on people in Chile and also the fact that many Chileans actually came to Australia to seek refuge. And a lot of them settled in Fairfield, Liverpool, right? Currently at Liverpool Regional Museum, there's an exhibition called Exilio, which stands for exiles, and a lot of Chileans who came to Australia. It tells the story of a lot of Chileans who came to southwest Sydney 30 years ago now. 40 years ago now.
Oh, yeah.
40 to 50 years ago. And last year in Parliament, I held an event marking the 50th anniversary of the election of the Allende government. And this is a real poster from the election of the Allende government, or the campaign to for pro-democracy protesters and stuff by the Chilean community, that was presented to me because I hosted that event. Because 10 years ago when I was sitting in Santiago at the Museum of Human Rights, I was sitting on sort of like the second story of the museum, and you basically had, imagine like a 3-story collage of faces. Like it was 3 stories high, and it was a collage of faces, and all of the faces were of people who had disappeared by the Pinochet regime
and just never came back. Well, this is it's quite similar. Like, I agree, because Iraq was like that for a while. Where we're from, the Saddam regime was not easy, right? It had things under control for such a turmoil of a region per se. That's what I would say. But a lot of people disappeared. We have family members that have disappeared. We have family members that have been kidnapped and never returned. And up until now, they're still digging up mass graves. So we've like, there's a lot that has happened. It's just a matter of bringing these things to talk about, because every era has had some sort of a trauma, some sort of a story to tell, and we forget that this is, what I always say, Liverpool and these areas. It's the migration hub.
It is, and because it is a migration hub, and because we have thrown our arms open to embrace so many people who've come from difficult experiences, who have found a new home here, part of my role, and this is how I see it, part of my role is to stand with community, not just in times of celebration and, during New Year's and all of this kind of thing, but also to stand with community and offer support, shoulder to cry on, whatever it is during times of difficulty as well. Because when you're with community, when you're with people, it has to be that consistency of not just during the good times, but also during the bad times as well.
Especially as a leader, I think it's a fundamental. I was going to go into the words of wisdom now.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think it's about time, because that actually reminded me of, like, okay, if we can just summarize, I know it's kind of hard, but summarize everything you just said now.
Oh man.
Into, like, not a word, but like words of wisdom.
Pressure's on.
Yeah, that's a big pressure. As you can probably tell, summarizing is not my strength. So, I love long chats. Love long chats. Look, I think that's probably a really good place to start, in the sense of, as a representative, as a leader, I really see it as my role to kind of stand with community, not like, above them or below or whatever, but standing with shoulder to shoulder, because it is, that implies that you're not only kind of there with them, but you're also listening as well. So, listening is incredibly important. And I also would encourage people to give things a go. I think it's so, and I'm guilty of this, right? I think it's so easy to be put off by the thought that something is uncomfortable. But all of the most, valuable and rewarding things can be uncomfortable at first. So if there's one thing that I can encourage people to do, it's get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and just try things.
I always say embrace failure.
That too. That too. And failure can be a very uncomfortable thing. So, again, like on that failure thing, I've put my hand up to run for office 6 times. I've been elected 3 times. So I got a 50% success rate, 50% failure rate.
Hopefully you get to 75%. Well, yeah, man, this has been absolutely amazing, eh?
I've learned more in this conversation than I have at 6 months of school. Well, I think it was so quiet because I'm like, there's always information coming out. I didn't pay attention.
But it's absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much.
Pleasure.
It's been great to chat with you, and it's been a learning curve for me as well. So thank you both.
Pleasure. Well, thanks guys. Thank you. Hopefully we get this episode up and running very soon.
Next time.